Let's take a look once again at this big bad Jew. How is it that we have such an overwhelming little people? We're not mud. There's only, well, we're the smallest nation in the world probably. How is it that we have such a tremendous impact? And why is it that the Gentiles, so many, fear us? Dealing with high expectations. What God is asking the Jews, indeed of all people, is to become superhuman. This doesn't mean flying through the air with a cape or toppling buildings with their hands. This is all physicality. But rather transcending human limitations to do the impossible. The real impossibilities holding people back aren't outside, they're inside. Faced with high expectations, it's natural for people to protest that too much is being asked of them. We're only human. They sometimes protest when asked to do difficult tasks, especially things that seem impossible. Those impossibilities aren't rooted in the laws of physics, but in people's self-definition. I don't do that. It's not what I do. And in their belief in their own limitations. We are Reformed Jews. We go to temple twice a year, sometimes. Transcending these limitations, what makes them superhuman. Leaping into the air and flying would be much easier than complete self-transcendence and living in an alternate and invisible spiritual world while walking through this material world, but we know it can be done. We do this 3 times a day when we come to pray. Because Abraham did it. And God says in the Torah, for this commandment which I would command you this day is not hidden from you, nor is it far away. It's not in heaven that you should say, who will go up to heaven for us and fetch it for us, to tell us so that we can do it. Nor is beyond the sea that you could say, who will cross to the other side of the sea, like my parents came from Eastern Europe, my great-grandparents, my grandparents also. They came from a completely different world. So he said, who will cross the other side of the sea for us and fetch it for us and tell us that we can do it? Rather, this matter is very close to you. It's in your mouth and in your heart so that you can do it. It's inside of us. The why of human life. The Abrahamic ideal for humanity, the why of human existence, is to perform the superhuman feat of spiritual self-transformation. Get that? We'll get those words back together again. And how do you do this? How do you transform yourself from the man or woman, the family, that twice a year goes to listen to something really, really boring on Rosh Hashanah, but you acknowledge Rosh Hashanah, and then again on Yom Kippur. The other Jewish holidays, they don't know about that. They don't know about Sukkot. They don't know about Shavuos. Hanukkah, okay, everybody lights Hanukkah lights and we get presents. Purim, they don't know about it. That's what Reform has done for us. So here, the ideal is to do something which is inside of us, by harmoniously balancing a connection to God while inhabiting a physical body and world. The how of being Jewish. Like only a few individuals in human history have achieved this at the highest level. Jewish philosophy maintains that for an entire people to approach such a lofty level requires spiritual refinement unattainable by man's choices alone. The Jewish people would need certain experiences and tools to have a chance at fulfilling their mission. To make the impossible possible, God provided the Jewish people with several divine tools. The most important one was the Torah. The commandments in the Torah, the mitzvos, the land of Israel also. And suffering/anti-Semitism, that's a part of the deal too, because what the Arabs are doing to us is forcing us together, which we manage to be fractious anyway, but forcing us together. Each one of these is a deep concept deserving of full explanation, but for our purposes, given the need for brevity, we will explain two of these divine tools. Now, I think this book, buy it, give it to your friends, really well prepared. The first divine tool is the Torah. We were the Jews. Why were the Jews given these 5 books? And how does the Torah help accomplish the mission? The traditional Jewish understanding, in fact, the most important article of Jewish belief is that 3,300 years ago, just try to figure that one out, 50 days after a slave nation was liberated and left a mighty civilization in shambles, Moses led the Jewish people to the mountain to hear God speak to them. This man Macron today, we're living in the year 2025, is taking this side, a very strong side of the Arabs. Let's see what happens to Macron. The book of Exodus describes the almost 200 years. The almost 200 years of Egyptian slavery and oppression that preceded the moment at Sinai when they heard God proclaim the first 2 of the 10 commandments and establish Moses as their prophet who would bring them the rest of God's instructions to them. In one powerful moment, 600,000 adult men plus women and children became prophets. We saw eternity. It was the most unique event in human history. The Jewish people stepped outside time and space. The world stopped in its tracks and the boundaries between heaven and earth evaporated. God delivered a message that transcended the boundaries of the senses and spoke directly to the souls of the waiting Jews. Mount Sinai introduced a new worldview for humanity. There was something called the 10 Commandments, and the whole Torah were more than a set of laws, the written 5 books of Moses and the detailed oral law, which is, many people did not realize that there are 2 forms in which the Torah is formed. The oral law is called the explanation of every word, letter, and law, which was subsequently partially written down in works such as the Mishnah and Talmud by this book. These were received by Moses over 40 days. To the millions standing at the foot of the mountain, to their descendants over time, and through them to the billions of humanity, God revealed his purpose. He told us his ethical code and the science of the spiritual world and how to bring it to life within us. The Torah was a revolution in human affairs. Its moral and philosophical principles changed how people lived. But even as it gave much, it also demanded much. Judaism tells us what kind of people God wants to be, what he wants us to be. Judaism is a religion given by God to define man, while the other faiths were created by man to define God. Interesting phrase, right? Read it again. Judaism is a religion given by God, which is inside of us, to define man, to refine man. Other religions were created by men, Christianity, to define God. He died on the cross. He was a great prophet. Wrote Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, the 19th century scholar and leader. The earth-shattering events of Sinai created 2 enduring impacts that helped the Jewish people in their mission. Jews began a love affair with learning Torah. We have houses of study everywhere. And as America grows, and if tremendous anti-Semitism doesn't completely stop us, which it has in the past, but we roll through it, the transformative experience of revelation altered Jewish souls, because when you get into the Torah has an automatic way of changing you for the better, and bringing love into your life. Effect number 1, a love affair with a book. He writes that the Jewish people have had a 120 generations long love affair with learning. They became the people of the book by treasuring it, studying it constantly, memorizing it, and passing it carefully from generation to generation. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, one of the foremost Jewish scholars of the 20th century, described Torah study as a symposium of generations, where young boys argue and revive the debates between religious scholars. Many of these scholars who lived and died long before the discovery of America, you're going back, I don't know. For the Talmud, you're going back 2,000 years. We belong to the same Masorah community, that is the tradition of the community of tradition, where generations meet. We read the words of Rashi, who lived approximately the year 1000. We read the words of Maimonides, who lived a couple hundred years later. We learn backwards, the 2,000 years ago. We learn through the Gaonim. We listen to their words. We belong to the same Masorah community where generations meet. He said, using the Hebrew word for the transmission of heritage, which is the word Masorah, you may have heard this, where hands, no matter how wrinkled and parched, meaning old, like say, my hands don't look like they used to. So how parched and dry one hand is, and how soft, young the other hand is. Shake and unite, and the great dialogue continues. Even today, tens of thousands study a page of Talmud every day, in the page of Talmud a day per program. That's called the Daf Yomi. And here's a picture of a gathering. I think it was like Madison Square Garden, but I'm not sure, or was it Yankee Stadium, one of those kind of things. Where the Siyam Shas, which that's what it's called the completion, because the Talmud is 2,000 pages. And you're doing 2,000 every 7 years. So he says, celebrating the completion of reading the Talmud. That's how devoted Jews who work in all different kinds of jobs are. Even today, tens of thousands study a page of Talmud every day in the page of Talmud, a day program. It takes 7.5 years to learn through the entire, well, let me get the numbers right, 2,711 dense pages of the Talmud. And when they finish, they celebrate it with the Siyam. Siyam means what? Which means completion and begin again. Like the world. The world as the sun continuously comes up. But now with deeper insights and thousands more joining. What a tremendous effect this has. There are many levels and aspects of Torah learning. This is the Torah Chaim. The Torah's full name means an instruction manual for living. To the fullest offering wisdom for happiness, and a guidebook that shows us the mindset that will help us navigate life's challenges. It brings us a moral code. The Torah defines ethical behavior down to the minutest detail, expressing and defining our core values. It contains an entire justice system and legal code, covering all aspects of life. Intellectual development. The Torah develops us intellectually through its rigorous and relentless question and answer learning method. Helping us to pursue truth. It transforms us spiritually by providing wisdom and power tools like prayer, meditation, and the mitzvahs, the commandments, things we must do to transcend our physical limitations. The Torah revelation began by changing the Jews themselves. The Torah did not aim at political revolution. It ushered in a revolution in moral consciousness. This primal book is not a passive experience. It is meant to change who we are. The Torah would not have changed the world otherwise. The Torah informs us not only how to make the most of our life, but also why we live. The Torah tells us who and what we are. It reaches our minds and our souls. Now, this is the part about it that people cannot understand. Let's say, for example, you were a secular Jew and you wanted to learn Hebrew in high school. But the language that's spoken in English has nothing to do with, in Israel, is a tool that can be used to help us get into the Torah, but it's just another language. It's like, say, taking Latin or Spanish. There it's just empty. But the nature of the Torah is that there's something inside of it which is very powerful. And that's what keeps us going. It reaches our minds and our souls, speaking to us both on the conscious and unconscious level that touches the deepest part of who we truly are. Going back to Rabbi Chaim Luzzatto, he writes, Torah study is a necessary matter. Without it, it's impossible to arrive at proper action, defining how to be good. In other words, you want to do something good. Let's take all these leftists. Leftist ideas originally were based on Jewish ideas. Humanity, caring for the sick and the poor, helping. That's the idea of the Democratic Party in the United States, except it got off track. It started helping the people you don't want to help. It has started promoting ideas which are antithetical to Torah values. However, besides all this, there's a great function in study towards the perfection of man. Amongst the spiritual influences that are brought from God for the needs of his creatures, that's Torah study, is the most precious and sublime of all that can be found in existence. And the greater the understanding, the greater the level of influence that we brought down through it. Now remember, through it, bringing it down into yourself and through yourself to glow for the rest of the world. To learn Torah is to study God's world. It is the science of the spiritual world. In the command, that is a mitzvah, for Jews to learn the entire Torah, we are called on to become philosophers, PhDs of God and life. Every Jew is challenged not only to become a scholar, but to internalize its ethical and spiritual truth. The Torah is the teacher, the interface with the divine. Now, let's understand this again. That's the point. That's why we spend so much time learning. That's why we want to bring everybody back. Because the Torah is not just a teacher, but it's an interface. It allows us to go from the spiritual world, I said it back way, from the physical world in which we are born, and our bodies and our 5 fingers and toes in each hand, so to speak, all of that, it allows us to bridge that physicality and the fact that the world is constantly changing to reach the eternity. When God spoke directly to the Jewish people, this is a soul-bending experience, he said. The revelation was a wave of raw spiritual power that no human being could fully endure. And this created the second permanent impact of Sinai. The soul of every Jew was transformed. And I'm talking about, there's always somebody against. But you see that I'm very against reform. The reform has done terrible things to the Jewish people, and the conservatives, unfortunately, they have this little bit of ritual there. And people do go to Cheder, many do, and can at least read Hebrew. I went to temple on, I think it was Mondays and Thursdays, for 45 minutes. I had to take an hour and a half bus ride to get there, but I got there. They had it worked out. And 45 minutes twice a week. So how much can a person learn? The mind, and all we did was read. Nobody learned any Torah. The mind and soul-blowing experience of the revelation is described in the Torah as synesthesia. What does that mean? They saw the sounds and heard the lights. They saw the signs and heard the sights. We were there. We didn't hear it from someone else. This altered spiritual state changed Jewish souls forever. They experienced a level of holiness so high and powerful that it would never be the same again. The Talmud says that at Sinai, the souls of all Jews were in a spiritual manner genetically changed, And that's the problem with the Jews. And even though we don't want to recognize this, we're not the same as the nations. Our ancestors stood at Sinai and they planted that within us. Scientists have recently discovered that experiencing high levels of stress can change our DNA, and that these effects can then be passed on from parents to their children. This is called epigenetics. Now think about this for a second. That you could go through a change that will so completely change you that it will change your children. Now, lahavdil, we have people in my family, my children have married into people who are children of Holocaust survivors. Don't think that that horror that the survivors experienced is not passed on to their children. It's in their DNA now. This is called epigenetics. Judaism says that in a simple way there is spiritual epigenetics. When a powerful spiritual force, let's turn it around the other way now, what we really want to say. And because many of those people who survived the Holocaust and who were really marred spiritually and in their DNA built yeshivas. They came to the United States, God gave them blessings and money, and they built these giant yeshivas. Lakewood. Well, so my son lives in Passaic, New Jersey, Passaic Clifton, which is a tremendous Torah community, but in Eretz Israel all over. They rebuilt it. Judaism today is a result of the horror of 1940-45. When a powerful spiritual experience is imprinted on and passed on in the DNA of our souls, because it worked both ways. This great 19th century Kabbalist Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad explained that the awesome holy fire that shone down from above at Sinai, that is the revelation at Sinai, caused a spiritual cleansing of all the souls standing there. The burning power of it spontaneously. I think of it spontaneously repulsed and cast away contaminations. It reminds me to say that, see, we really appreciate your comments on this. I'm not the world's greatest reader. Sinai was burned into our souls. Even 3,300 years later, when some Jews have lost conscious clarity of the mission, we don't know anymore. Their spiritual DNA, look at this, still pushes them to accomplish, disrupt, and transform. The gift of Torah, then, is the first tool that God gave the Jews to help them accomplish their difficult national mission. The second divine tool we will explain is more difficult to understand. Now this goes back with a comment that I made because, coming from my background, my family has been here for 150 years, close to it. That's a long time to be in a place where there are no mikvahs, there are no synagogues, there's no cheder, there's no anything. And to survive, I think it's incredible. But then contrasting to that, and there are many people like me, and we're hungry for the light. But by the same token, I mentioned the suffering. Because somehow, I know there's a Gemara, a Talmud, saying that the Jewish people are like an olive. So I've seen this said different ways. That they're sitting there until you crush them. Then the oil starts coming out. That is where we are today. The second divine tool is called suffering. God promised Abraham that his descendants would be given the Torah and the land of Israel, but that the necessary preparation involved in unpleasant and lengthy descent into a foreign land. We had to become slaves in Egypt. We also promised that the Jewish people will experience much more persecution in the centuries to come. The third prophecy Abraham received from God is called the covenant between the parts. And in it, God revealed the special covenantal relationship he would have with Abraham's children, and the special role they would play in history. The prophecy also informed Abraham of the very painful future his descendants will endure before receiving the Torah. And God said to Abram, "Know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. Why was suffering part of the package? It's certainly counterintuitive that the people earmarked by God for a unique role should also be earmarked for persecution, a Holocaust. And to be fair, Judaism says that negative prophecies, those dealing with suffering, did not necessarily have to come to fruition. It depends a lot on what we're doing down here. While there was a chance to accomplish the mission without this, it seemed unlikely from the outset, and the nature of how people are, which raises the following question: why did God decree this, and how does it help? So this requires some spiritual unpacking, and I can acknowledge up front that even the unpacking, the answers remain emotionally difficult to appreciate. Now understand this is that why is it that after the Holocaust, after 2,000 years wandering in the lands of people who hate us, we're back in our land? Didn't mean the haters went away. They just can now concentrate in one place. The spiritual crucible. Abraham's descendants would have to be refined not only in spiritual aspiration, but in the fires of persecution. Now, I'm always fascinated because I learned Spanish very easily. And I studied it for a long time, and actually God moved me down to Miami where I learned a little Cuban style, unavoidable, where I found out that a lot of the Cubans were descended from Jews. Columbus was a converso, person who was forced to convert, and so were all the people on his boats. A lot of it settled in Cuba. There was never an Inquisition in Cuba. But then I found out from finally discovering, you got a family that came here in the 1880s. It's not easy to find anybody that knows who we come from. And one, I found people who were originally from Baltimore who told me that we had a Spanish name in our family. How did you get that? Got that because this is going back to, in 1898, one of my great uncles fought in the Spanish-American War in Cuba. When he came back, he started talking about the fact that we actually have a Jewish past, a Spanish past. Well, it's covered over by hundreds of years in Lithuania. That would change everything. But nonetheless, the connection is there. You see how many different places, how many horrible things happen. And if you know Cuban people, which most people don't, okay, so if you don't live in Miami, you'll see they have a fondness for us. In fact, all the Caribbean people, even the Haitians, the Jamaicans, and there are Jamaican Jews, believe it or not, black Jamaican Jews, just like there are white Cuban Jews who no longer, they want to be, they want us, but they can't find a way back. God should help us. The sublime and admittedly difficult to grasp idea is that the Jews needed to become spiritually refined by breaking down and extracting some of their physicality. As metal is refined in a smelting furnace, just as the smelter uses heat to drive off impure elements and leave the pure metal behind, God refines the Jewish people through a historical process that removes physicality and allows the attainment of holiness. Do you mean to say that the Holocaust was a refinement process? But if you look at what was going on, let's take Lithuania, which was the seat of the greatest Jewish learning in Europe. We have a Victor Miller testifying that he went down to the beach on Shabbat. He walked over to the beach and he saw all the Jews sunbathing on Shabbat, Gentilizing themselves. This all throughout Europe in the period after the First World War. Jews lost their their structure. They became much more Gentilized. And then what happened? But you, God, took and brought us out of Egypt. You brought us out of that iron blast melting furnace to be God's very own people, as is now the case. Interestingly, I was once told the lesson by an older friend of mine who survived the Holocaust. Here we go. In an intimate conversation we had a few years before he passed, which was in the year 2010. He explained to me the core lesson. Rebbe, I really didn't think you were coming back. I forgot. I get involved in something else. I'm going to stop this shear. I'm doing a shear by myself over here. So give me a second. I'm going to stop it now. And I'll find a way back to that, and we'll start from that place then. Okay, let me stop this.